Meine Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen zum nächsten Gespräch. Ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie hier sind, um einen der großen Gewinner dieser Buchmesse zuzusehen bei dem, was er macht und zuzuhören bei dem, was er beschreibt, was er macht. Denn Shaun Tan, unser Gast, den wir heute hier begrüßen, ist seit gestern Abend deutscher Jugendliteraturpreisträger. Und zwar für dieses wunderbare Bilderbuch, Geschichten aus der Vorstadt des Universums. Kein Comic also, aber er war nominiert in der Kategorie Bilderbuch, weil der Deutsche Jugendliteraturpreis den Schönheitsfehler besitzt, keine eigene Comic-Kategorie zu besitzen. Und ich werde Ihnen nur 2, 3 Bilder daraus zeigen, hier indem ich das Buch hochhalte, denn wir wollen uns heute mehr mit Comicarbeit von Shaun Tan beschäftigen. Aber wenn ich Ihnen bereits hier so etwas zeige, diese Doppelseite beispielsweise, dann haben Sie bereits einen kleinen Vorgeschmack, auch wenn Sie noch nicht erkennen können, was drauf ist, über die Art von Bildern, die wir gleich zeigen werden. Und wenn ich Ihnen dann wiederum so eine Doppelseite zeige, dann können Sie wahrscheinlich auch gut verstehen, warum dieses Buch in der Kategorie Bilderbuch es vielleicht doch etwas leichter hatte als das zweite Buch, mit dem Shaun Tan in genau derselben Kategorie nominiert war. Er war so meines Wissens nach der erste Autor, der in einem Jahr mit 2 Büchern für den Jugendliteraturpreis nominiert war in derselben Kategorie. Das andere Buch, was nominiert war, ist dieses hier, Ein neues Land, und das ist der Titel, mit dem wir uns überwiegend beschäftigen wollen. Denn auch wenn man sagen kann, das darf man als Bilderbuch durchgehen lassen, zeigt ein ganz kurzer Blick hinein, wenn ich am Lesezeichen vorbeikomme, dass es sich dabei um eine Kombination aus Bilderbuch und Comic handelt. Sie haben sehr, sehr viele kleine, sequenziell erzählte Seiten, kleinteilige, sequenziell erzählte Seiten, die nach dem Comic-Prinzip funktionieren, und Sie haben gleichzeitig, wie Sie rechts sehen, oder respektive von Ihnen aus gesehen natürlich links, die großen Tableaus in klassischen Bilderbucherscheinungsart. Und das ist das Bemerkenswerte an diesem Buch, dass es beide mediale Erzählformen miteinander vereint und das ohne ein Wort Text zu gebrauchen. Es gibt keine einzige geschriebene Passage in diesem Buch, alles wird über Bilder erzählt. Ein sehr ungewöhnliches Verfahren, knappe 120 Seiten stark, eine überaus eindrucksvolle Geschichte. Wie gesagt, ein neues Land, eine Einwanderergeschichte, über die ich jetzt mit Shaun Tan sprechen möchte. Der englische Originaltitel, oder besser der australische Originaltitel, ist The Arrival, die Ankunft. Und interessant ist, dass das Buch fast in jedem Land, in das es übersetzt worden ist, wobei man natürlich sagen muss, Übersetzung ist hier ein sehr seltsamer Begriff, sagen wir in den Ländern, wo es gedruckt worden ist. Und Sie müssen außer dem Titel nichts übersetzen. Aber genau darum ist offensichtlich in jedem Land ein anderer Titel gewählt worden. Im Deutschen also statt die Ankunft jetzt eben ein neues Land. Und Shaun Tan ist 1974 in Australien geboren, in der Nähe von Perth. Er ist der Sohn einer malaiischen Einwandererfamilie, die schon in den 60er Jahren nach Australien gekommen ist. Er hat einen älteren Bruder, ist relativ isoliert, auch für australische Verhältnisse aufgewachsen. Perth ist eine Stadt ganz im Westen des Landes. Als wir uns am Montag das erste Mal trafen, erzählte er mir, die nächste größere Stadt ist 1200 Kilometer entfernt. Das heißt, Sie sehen, mit was für einer seltsamen Isoliertheit man es da zu tun hat. Und wir werden jetzt natürlich ins Englische wechseln, damit Shaun auch weiß, worüber wir überhaupt reden. Und ich will Ihnen einige Bilder wiederum jetzt hier auf die Leinwand werfen aus diesem Buch. And we'll just now start talking about the book, about the arrival, because of course in the Comic Center this is a thing which interests most people. And just have a look at these pictures we're showing over there. We'll just start with this splash page there, because it sets kind of a mood for this story. This is the actual arrival of your hero. It's a guy who leaves his family behind. He doesn't leave them to never see them again, but he leaves them and travels to another country to hope that he earns money so they can join him later. And he arrives on a ship at this harbor. Could you tell us something about these figures which are standing there, about the look of this picture, because of course it evokes lots of different historical aspects of the story of immigration?
I guess, well, the first thing to say is that it's intended to look quite mysterious, and there's no real explanation for anything that happens in a scene like this or in the book. So when we look at it, I guess we depend on, and when I'm drawing, I depend on trying to find some resonance with things that exist in the real world but are not exactly like the real world. So the first impression I think I wanted to convey with a picture like this was something a little bit like approaching the Statue of Liberty. and ships of immigrants going to Ellis Island. So I was looking at a lot of pictures of that, but I wanted to make it very strange to really give the idea of what it is like to actually be an immigrant, and a lot of people travelling to New York around 1900, which is roughly when this story is set, would not have seen the Statue of Liberty before. We're sort of very used to the image, we see it all the time. We know images of Australia, New York, Germany, wherever. So to actually tell a story about somebody travelling to that country and draw that country as it is, doesn't really capture the feeling of ignorance and mixture of awe and fear and anxiety and wonder and all these things that you can only achieve, I think, when you create a truly surreal environment. This statue here is it's open to interpretation. It only appears once in the story. It's not elaborated. I had the idea that instead of a Statue of Liberty, it's a statue of fraternity, of brotherhood or something like that, and that was the starting point for the scene.
The style of your drawings is very unique because you use pencil, which is quite unusual for your work. If we just take a short look at an older book, which is The Lost Thing or Die Fundsache in German, you see these wonderful, colorful pictures, almost painted. And this one is all drawn with pencil. Why did you choose that technique?
Well, there were a number of reasons. Because the book is quite long and elaborate, and I'm actually not so accustomed to comics. My background is as a picture book illustrator, but I found that I was, inadvertently becoming a comic artist, whether I necessarily wanted to or not. I just found that that sort of medium was the best way to express an idea. For me, I enjoy reading black and white comics. I don't know what it is, but I really like black and white comics. Also, the decision to get rid of words from the book meant that I was trying to simplify it in other ways. And for me, using pencil is the simplest medium I know available to me. And in fact, it's actually the most fundamental. So, even with Die Fundsache, all of those drawings were drawn as pencil drawings first before I start painting them. So this is almost like the arrival was closer to my sketchbook in some ways than a lot of my other books. It's sort of more direct expression.
There's a beautiful example for this pre-drawings in this book, in Geschichten aus der Stadt an die Vorstellung des Universums, because flipped on the back side you have a pencil drawing of a picture which appears inside the book, which is completely colored and then rendered into another technique, but there you have this kind of relationship.
That's an example. Every single image in the book is like that. I work it out in pencil first, and before I start painting, because I change my mind so many times, and pencil is the easiest medium to edit. So, I have a pencil in one hand and an eraser in the other, and I'm just draw, erase, draw, erase, draw, erase. And so when it comes time to painting, I can still do that if I wanted to, but it's a bit painful to have to constantly paint over everything. I also use oil paint a lot, and you have to really know what you're doing beforehand when you're working in that medium.
It's by far the longest story you've written until today. So why did you have to choose more than 100 pages for this story without any words?
I felt like I had no choice. I didn't want to do a book that long. Originally it was a 32-page book, and that's what I told my publisher. And then I said to them, this book might be better if it was 48 pages, and then 64, then 80, then 96. There are always multiples of 16 because I don't know how it is with comics, but with picture book production, they're just used to working with lots of 16 pages. And so in the end it's 128. And I wanted 10 more pages, and the publisher said, no, that's enough. So I just had to make do with that amount. But the reason it expanded was firstly getting rid of words. When you get rid of words, you lose a lot of very convenient, abstract concepts, and then you have to show everything literally. And this was a choice I made, that to show the experience of an immigrant, I would show every single thing literally. So, putting a key into a door lock, or or cutting some piece of fruit, or stepping over a threshold, or picking up a hat. All these things had to be shown in intricate detail. The book is based on immigrant stories that I researched, so I did a lot of reading before I started working, and I made notes, and I had a filing cabinet, and I kept all my notes in a filing cabinet. And so when it came time to do the book, I had a lot of material, and a lot of it was focusing on these kind of very intimate, personal stories that people tell. If you ask somebody about their journey to another country, they won't tell you the broad story. They'll focus on little tiny details, and I wanted the book to look like that, and as a result it ended up being quite long.
Let's take a look at an example for this way of storytelling, because the next 3 pictures you will see are quite a good example for that. These are the first 3 pages from the book. Bottom is of course the frontispieces. There you can see a technique which is quite typical for the work of Shaun Tan, because he montages things together, uses documents and everything just to set the mood for a way of story. It doesn't have to do too much with the rest of the story, but it just gives you an impression of the time where all this is set, and about the way things look like this bureaucratic formula and things like that. And that is the title page. That is, well, let's say the hero. He looks a little bit like you, is that true?
I might stand up actually, so you can actually see me. It is actually me in the pictures, which means that a lot of people ask, you know, is this story autobiographical? It's not. I grew up in suburban Australia, and have never left. I've never immigrated anywhere. I'm very interested in other people's experience, but when it comes time to do a drawing, you know, I have to look at something to draw something. I find it very difficult to just produce images out of my head, and I used myself as a model. I had a suit that I bought from a second-hand store for the equivalent of €8, and I borrowed a hat from a friend's grandfather, and an old suitcase, and I accumulated all these other props. And I actually turned part of my house into kind of like a film studio, and I built rough approximations for each scene, and then I would film. I filmed scenes, so I made almost like a badly edited movie, and then I went through and when it was people at least, other things I just drew from my imagination, but when it was people, I just looked at the film, and I examined the way people behave in an actual situation. So at first I was posing people and myself, like opening a door, you know, you go like this, and I found that the pictures ended up looking like somebody posing for a photograph. So what I did instead was I started filming. I just told people, this is a story, because I used some friends as well as myself. I said, this is the story. Just do what you think a person would do in this situation. So there was actually some acting involved, and then I filmed them, and often they would do things I didn't expect, and they would make much better pictures. So all of these images I used as reference for my drawings, and I used myself because I was the cheapest person. You know, I work very inexpensively, and I'm very patient, really patient with myself.
Have you ever worked that way before?
No, I haven't. This is the first time that I've worked that way. In fact, when I first started doing the book, it actually looked more cartoon-like. Everything looked like... I'm a big fan of Raymond Briggs, the British illustrator, and a lot of this book actually looked like a Raymond Briggs graphic novel when I started drafting it. And it was only when I kept going back to my research and looking at old photographs that I thought, how good would it be to do a book that looks like an old photograph album? So instead of just looking at these pictures, I would try to reproduce the details of them, and I was afraid to do that because I knew it would then take several years, you know, potentially to draw all the images, but in the end I decided to do that. So the book took, in total it took 5 years to do. The first year was spent doing bad versions of the book that didn't work, and then I abandoned, and by the second year I figured out what it would look like, and then I only had four other years to go, so it was all smooth. Smooth sailing.
Sounds quite smooth. Well, now let's have a look at the first 3 pages of the book. This is the first page. And you see no people at all on the first page except for the last picture, the last panel with the family, the man, the woman and their daughter. And this, as you see on the second page, is just a photo which stands on a board. And if you go back to the beginning, then you see that all these different objects, which of course are symbols for a normal kind of household, normal kind of way of living, they are now changed into these pictures of hands coming together. And of course you can imagine that these hands which come together here are the hands of those guys who are in the picture. And when you go to the third page, then you have the first splash page of the book. So you have these little pictures on the two first pages, and then you have that big one, and it's absolutely stunning. If you're turning the page and coming to this picture, it's a great effect.
All the objects that were in the previous image are in this picture, so they're just close-ups of details that were already in the picture that comes later. And that's my wife. So she was also cheap to use as a model.
You spent a little more than €8 for her dress, I hope.
No, it's whatever you have in your wardrobe. I'm not spending any money.
And after that quite domestic scene, they are leaving the house. You see the three people going outside, and you have this kind of symbolic shadow which is covering the streets, and you have it even more impressive on the next double spread page, where you have these shadows of snakes or dragons flying over the city. And that of course doesn't have to be a realistic image of what is happening over there, but it's metaphorical. For what?
I don't have a clear idea when I'm working, and that's why I'm interested in the pictures. That kind of drives me forward and keeps it exciting. I think if I knew that these were symbols for something, I would rapidly lose interest and I would stop drawing. But they're sort of meant to represent whatever the abstract image kind of evokes, so it's a dark feeling, and different people have different interpretations. It could be poverty, like some sort of representation of poverty, disease, political oppression, some kind of just economic breakdown or something, and or it could just relate to the family, just that family in particular. But I did want to get a sense that it's a place, basically a place where something is going wrong, and it's happened in a very slow, creeping way. It hasn't happened suddenly. Elsewhere in the book there's images of the world going wrong in a very sudden and dramatic way, but this is kind of like a place that's slowly dying. And this is one of those images I find hard to explain because it almost comes from a dream. I didn't have to think about it too much. I just had this very strong image of city streets with these black serpents moving really slowly, almost like clouds. Almost like the smoke from chimneys had become solid into dragons or something, and it was just swimming through the streets. And what was interesting for me was not the creatures, but the fact that everybody else goes about their business. They're still walking around in the streets, they have to catch trains, they have to go shopping, while these things are moving above their heads, so they're so used to them.
You have a kind of tradition, or your own tradition into science fiction illustration, so was that influenced by movies or things from science fiction illustrations?
Probably. When you get an idea and you don't know where it comes from, there's always a danger that it did come from somewhere, but you just don't remember, so that's a little bit of a danger. I grew up mostly influenced by movies and television. It's the art form of the Australian suburbs, really. And then to a lesser degree looking at books and then paintings in art galleries, but a lot of my... As a child I was obsessed with Star Wars, and this film The Dark Crystal, I don't know if it's well known here, but it looks terrible to me now, but as a child I was really obsessed with it.
Let's have a look at another double spread page. That is that image of the boat transition to the new country, and you have this small boat and a big white cloud over the ocean. The water is absolutely calm, but there is a kind of menace into the picture. You don't know where you're going to, what you have to expect. Why using a double page for this one image? You have several of those, and why spending so much place of this very small amount of 108 pages?
Oh, well, I really started with the double-page images, and then needed to have bits in between to link them up. So the double pages are always the most interesting part for me, because I'm a landscape painter. That's my background. So I always think in terms of big landscapes, and then going back and showing all the small details of action was actually sort of more unfamiliar for me. In this case, the big picture, you know, as in comics, it slows things down, so it looks like a long journey because it's actually a big page. I mean, it's as simple as that, really.
Then we have pictures like that, which of course is, well, it's kind of citation of for Australia, a very famous painting from the 19th century, as you've told me.
Yes.
And why did you include it? Because I'm not quite sure if it shows the same boat, because if we take a look back, you have, of course, the chimneys, but you don't have the masts, and here you have another kind of decoration.
That's very well observed, you know, I never noticed that. Only a comics person would pick that up, you know, because they're into continuity. That's the first time I've even noticed, so I guess for me, it's all about effect. I'm not interested in the internal logic.
We won't stick with that.
Yeah. And move on.
Yeah, okay. Now we're in the new country, this neue Land in Germany, and you have this, well, fantasy-like world that you present to us, which is completely different to everything we've seen before, with these very menacing houses and then no nature at all, just cities, just bricks and so. And here you have the open space, we have objects flying into space. Why did you choose such a complete, well, opposite of the world before? Does it have to be that ideal as it is shown here?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily ideal. I guess it looks more interesting. I did want to make this story. Well, as I developed the book, I realised that the place that he's going to. At first, I thought it was somewhere like Australia or the United States, and then I thought about these places, and they are made of immigrant experiences. So I had this idea that every single person in the city actually comes from somewhere else originally, probably within their lifetime, and that the city would be made of all these people who've learned to live together and build a new world, because other places in the world have fallen apart. Almost like if you imagine that there's another continent, which, you know, there could have been by an accident of geology. Who's to say that in a parallel planet Earth there's not an 8th continent? And I often wonder what kind of culture would be on this other continent. So I was interested in inventing a kind of a culture, and it ended up looking kind of, I guess it looks nice, but at first it also is strange, and I wanted it to look slightly creepy, you know, slightly scary. As you become familiar with it through all those pages, it does sort of resolve into something that's familiar and I guess a pleasant place to live, a place that the reader might want to actually live in.
You're using these basic geometrical forms, like the circle, like the cone, like the square, especially in different combinations in that city, while the old country where the guy comes from is just, well, built in the forms of squares or something like that.
Yeah.
I found that very interesting too, because it looks much more interesting, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of looks like a new world, you know, the new world. There's new shapes, particularly the cone. I thought the cone was very interesting. I don't know why, but I was very attracted to these cone shapes. And they make sense later on, because there is an internal logic in this city. A lot of the public transport is floats in the air, and so I thought, well, to be able to see your destination through markers, the way ships have buoys and flags and poles. So the city has all these different patterned spikes, so that people can see where they are. And but of course, if you're a newcomer to the city, that's very strange, and you don't understand what all those things mean.
And here you have a page which gives you an impression of these different kind of people who are meeting in this city. From, you see different races, different kind of jobs. And you have these kind of snapshots from the everyday life in the streets of the city. Are there any models for those guys too? Any photos you've consulted? Or?
Yeah, actually all of these are based on actual photographs of street scenes from the early 20th century. So that was the basis. This boy here is in the original one is holding up the announcement that says the Titanic has sunk. So it's kind of puts the story around 1912. This woman was holding a dog. I changed everything, of course, and added different figures and things, but the basic ideas came from just looking at old photographs from archives.
And there we have this kind of central moment for the story, because the guy just got a flat where he could move into, and there he found this strange animal. He doesn't know what to do with it, he doesn't know how it comes from and what it does there. But this is the first friend he makes in the city, and he stays with him. Does everyone in this city has a kind of animal going along with him?
Yeah, apparently. At first it was just this character, and originally it was a pest. Like it was something that lived in the toilet and came out and frightened him, and in the original version of the story, but I thought that was a little bit disgusting, that you'd have to have a pet that lives in the toilet. So I changed it, and also in changing it I realised that this creature could actually be a more central character and perhaps friendly, and because the book is about communicating without words, and the book itself is an attempt to communicate without words, I thought it would be very appropriate to have the main relationship in the story is between a human and an animal. So there's obviously no speech involved, and they have to communicate through a great cultural difference. So the cultural difference here is obviously a strong genetic difference, and at first he doesn't really know what that creature is, and then gradually he just gets used to it.
We go over once again to the city. You have these cone shapes again on the lower picture, and you have these large aqueducts going over there. Comes that from art history or somewhere? Is it just imagination? This wonderful scene with the boat floating through it. I don't know how it does, of course. The laws of physics don't seem to be valid there.
Isn't that great? With pictures you don't have to worry about physics. Yeah, that's pretty much just straight from imagination, and there's no references for that image. Big arches are something that I have drawn before. I'm very attracted to them, and it's architecture that you don't see in Australia very often. It's from the ancient world, which we don't really have very old built structures, and so I find them fascinating.
And that kind, of course, is very well known to most people who have seen pictures from, well, the 19th century industry architecture and things like from the 20s. Of course, this is dark kind of woodcuts or ink drawings and so on. But of course, it has something very strange inside the story, because if you go back to the page before, you see this is based on a white page, and that one is based on a grey background. So why did you change, well, your kind of page color for this scene?
It was really just a simple way of showing that the story is going to a different place. So this book isn't just one story, it's actually 4 different stories. And then I wanted to have little stories about other immigrants that our character meets. And I struggled for a while with how to show that we're actually looking at a different story, because it can be very confusing to the reader if you just suddenly jump to an unfamiliar landscape. So I just changed the style of the images, the colour changes slightly. All of these are pencil drawings, just with black and white pencil, and the colour has been added digitally. And also the old paper has been added digitally as well. So I accumulated a digital library of old pieces of paper that I collected, and I used them in the book to make it look like old documents.
The whole book is designed like an old photo album, which you're looking at, quite with tears and everything like it. It's quite fascinating to see it, and it's wonderfully printed. In fact, it's a really beautiful book just to look at, not just to open it, just to look at. It's fantastic. And there we have perhaps the most spectacular, well, panel or image which is inside the book, which of course evocates lots of different aspects. You have this very old church-like building down there from the Baroque or things like that, or even from the Gothic. And then you have these large giants which with their, well, vacuum cleaners or something like it. this was for me absolutely stunning to see a picture like that, because that is a story that is told in the book from another immigrant who tells about his fate and why he left his country. That of course was a little bit too fast. And then comes this picture. What does it, well, I don't want to say symbolize because I don't like symbols, but what does it tell?
It was inspired actually by a story in my research. It was a Romanian woman who was talking about the communist regime in Romania, and she had this just one little comment where she said it was like they were trying to suck the life out of everything, and she said even it felt like the birds had been sucked out of the trees, so that we couldn't hear the birds anymore. And I thought, you know, she was speaking obviously metaphorically, but I thought, what if you represented that literally? That you represented like a communist or a Nazi regime as something that is an ideology that's about negativity and removing things, not actually making anything, but taking things away. And I thought the vacuum cleaner, at first I thought how ridiculous, you know, vacuum cleaners. But then when I started sketching it, I thought, well, you know, it's kind of convincing that something like that could happen. There's certainly people in the world that want to do this. So it's kind of like a drawing as an expression of some dark aspect of human nature that's always around. And in this case, amplifying some things that happened in the 20th century. So I think there's quite obvious references to 20th century history here. But representing it in a way so that it looks fresh and striking, and as if we haven't seen those events before.
There you have another page which fascinated me a lot, because there he works at an assembly line. He found work at last. He had very much difficulties finding work, and then, well, he came to a factory, worked at the assembly line, and as you can see, he only has to move every, well, few seconds or minutes. Very, very, well, boring work, of course, and that is represented in these 20 panels where it's happening, well, really nothing. Yeah. Which of course is a very strong image for this kind of boring work. And there he meets an old guy who tells him a story at the assembly line, and that is the complete opposite of that quiet page over there, because he tells a war story, and I found it a brilliant idea to combine these two ways of living. The one at the assembly line who might be even happy to work there because he lived through all these war times, and then give these impressions who could be pictures from, well, the Russian Revolution or a time like that, in this very, very dark mood. And well, perhaps the darkest picture in the whole book is of course this one, with all the bones lying around, a typical battlefield in fact. So this is unusual too, because that is the only picture, I guess, where you see dead people in the book.
Yeah, that's true.
Why did you decide to use them once? Only once, or at all?
Well, it was really for the particular page composition. So the thing about both those images is that you see them on the page at the same time. So it's like before, after, or cause and effect. So the cause of war is this effect which is almost immediate. There's not a big difference between the decision to fight and then the death. So, and I also wanted to show the way, at least as I understand it, war often happens. War is a period of extreme boredom, and then sudden rush of fear, and then a period of extreme silence afterwards. And so that's the pattern in the book, you know. Before these images you see just these feet marching, which somewhat rhymes with the work in the factory, the idea of a dehumanizing experience that lasts for a long time, and then a sudden crisis, and then just this death at the end. And it's the last story in the book, and it's also probably the saddest story, because there's you know, there is some hope because the man survived, but there's a sense in which his entire country is gone. You know, there's nothing left.
He returns from the war and finds his whole city in ruins. He has lost a leg. There is nothing that could keep him inside his country.
So they've gone to destroy another city, and when he comes back, his city is destroyed. So, which is, you know, that's what happens.
But of course, it doesn't end on a sad note, because well, at last, our hero earns enough money to let his family join him in the new life, in the new country. And that is not the final page, in fact, of the book, with one of the last ones. And as you can see, it is a little bit like the third page I've shown to you, where you could see the guys, well, saying goodbye to each other, and you have all these objects that you had in the first picture. You have again here, but in different shapes. You have them in the shapes of the new country, and that for me was the moment where I thought, well, in this book, every little detail is absolutely, well, perfect, because everything is afterwards comes back or is buried and things like that. I was stunned. Really stunned.
Yeah, I did the book. I didn't do the book chronologically. I did it almost as a jigsaw puzzle. So this bit goes there, this bit goes there, and so it was full of holes. And it also developed very gradually with many drafts. And I was constantly going back and adding and removing things across the story. So I don't see this story as being like a storyline that you follow from beginning, middle to end. It's more like a map. And that was part of my idea, is that this is like a map of someone's experience told as lots of little pictures. And you don't have to read the book in sequence. You can go backwards and forwards, or just look at a section. And really, with a picture book or an illustrated book, they work by being read several times, not just once. So I kind of create the book expecting that, or hoping that people will read it a second or third time and find new things.
You got lots of awards for this book. And you already received the most important comic award in Europe, in Angoulême, the Grand Prix of Angoulême. Will you ever do a comic book again?
No, because it's all downhill from there, you know. It's like anything's going to be a disappointment.
I'm not quite sure about that.
You know, I don't know. The only reason I did this book the way it is that the story suggested it. Like for me, there was something about the experience of immigration that was almost exactly like a dream, and almost exactly like a comic somehow. The photo album is like a comic, and I think there's a great connection I've noticed between comics and dreams. I feel like comics is the best medium for expressing some sort of dream life, and that's why I worked in this way. So unless I find a story that also is suitable for a long-form graphic narrative, I may not do another one like this, but it's you know, maybe, I don't know. It depends on the story.
We're looking forward to reading once again a comic book review. Of course, Shaun Tan hat sich bereit erklärt, auch zu signieren. Es werden jetzt gleich hier Zettel ausgegeben, die Sie sich nehmen können, wenn Sie eine Signatur haben wollen. Ich danke Ihnen sehr für die Aufmerksamkeit, and thank you very much, Shaun Tan, for joining us here.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.